Most sports are played outside, so they should be enjoyed outside too. That's why Buffalo Wild Wings offers the sports patio. Sure, you can stay indoors with air-conditioned comfort and human-friendly light, but few things beat natural light, a cold drink in your hand, a delicious wing in your mouth, and athletes entertaining you on television. So order up some cocktails or beers and some of our signature shareables. Then watch all the games on our sports patio. Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Patio availability varies. Please drink responsibly.
We're gonna have a TV party tonight. Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight. Alright! We'll pass out on the couch. Alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Don't talk about anything else. We don't want to know. We're dedicated to our favorite shows.
And tonight, our favorite show is Glow, Season 2, brought to you by the good people at Netflix. And the gal that brought us Weeds and Orange is the New Black, Genji Cohen. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And joining me is my tag team partner, the hawk to my animal, the hitman to my Neidhart, the axe to my Smash, the Marty Jannetty to my Shawn Michaels, or the Shawn Michaels to my Marty Jannetty. Let's be, fair here. I don't want to start this off on the wrong foot. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Sean Comer, you're not. Hello, Sean. How you doing?
I'm Sean. You're not. And, okay, so I'm the dead half of the Road Warriors. But on the other hand, I'm also the talented half of the Hart Foundation. I'm Barry Darso, the most prolific half of Demolition. But then again, you almost called me Marty Jannetty.
And it was like,
but then reverse course and decided that I Sean Comer am the showstopper, the main event, the icon.
How about you be the Rob Van Dam to my Sabu? How's that sound?
Yeah, great. I'm the one who fucks up his golden opportunity to break through the glass ceiling.
That's okay.
I'll take it.
I'll be the one that just quietly points to the sky and walks off stage in an XPW show and says, "I can't wait to get high."
Well, our previous dynamic was pretty much that you were the straight man that was reining me in. So, although, goddamn, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in the ECW locker room and known, sometimes probably, who was telling who to take it down a notch. I like to believe it's Rob. I like to believe it's Ronald Van Donald.
Who knows? I'm sure the ECW locker room was a through the looking glass situation to what was actually presented on television. Like, you seem like an idiot on TV, but you're actually holding things together backstage.
You have to wonder if there was a voice of reason in that bunch, or if everybody was just, every time somebody had an idea, everyone was saying, "Yes, I approve. Do this."
I'm sure there was no voice of reason until the night they nearly drove Kurt Angle out of the building by crucifying someone, and then there had to be a voice of reason. But this wrestling talk brought to you again by our subject for tonight's TV party tonight. We are talking Glow Season 2, which aired on Netflix just a couple of weeks ago. We're getting around to it now with our crowded podcast schedule on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. And so, who better to bring on to talk about a show about wrestling women than a man who appreciates his wrestling women, Sean Comer. And I'll tell you, Sean,
Yeah, sure.
that's right. I'll tell you, I was excited when they initially talked about this show in pre-production for the first season. First season ended up being really good. It had its issues, but I think the subject material itself does not lend itself to a large audience, and so they were taking a lot of chances, but they succeeded. They hit it out of the park. And then I was very excited to see what they would do with season 2. And I'll tell you, just to start the conversation off and get in, and draw you in here, season 2 is far superior to season 1. I mean, almost a different show in terms of just how good it is. I know Robert Winfrey tends to say that I have a tendency to overblow things, over-exaggerate. That's part gimmick, part truth. But I don't think I'm overblowing it too much by saying this second season is probably some of the best singular season of TV in at least the last couple of years.
I don't know if I would go quite that far, but it was certainly accomplished. There was certainly a sense that they looked very hard at season 1 and definitely scrutinized, okay, this worked, this didn't. How do we keep the spotlight on this and turn up the volume on it while sanding down these rougher edges? And for the most part, it worked, but the lingering problems are the same problems that I keep coming across every time I've watched a Genji Cohen series.
So why don't you talk about what some of those are?
Okay, for those who are unfamiliar, and bear with me because occasionally, just to kind of check my own facts, I'm going to have my laptop in front of me, and I'm going to go down the line and kind of maybe Wikipedia a few things just to make sure that I've got things completely accurate. Her real breakout was Weeds on Showtime, which ran for 8 seasons, should have ended probably after number 4, maybe number 5. And it established this pattern of you have a show that theoretically focuses on just one lead's arc, whether you're talking about Nancy Botwin in Weeds, or Piper Chapman in Orange is the New Black, or in this case, Ruth in Glow. But you end up having such a strong, compelling ensemble cast surrounding that lead that they end up either intentionally or by design gradually encroaching in on that spotlight and sometimes managing to outshine whoever that intended lead was. But the bigger issue that happens is that the shows are like these living organisms made of ADD at times. And they just struggle with this perpetually frustrating timing and pacing. Sometimes you'll have an arc that is drug out far too long, to the point where it burns out before the end of the season, and then, well, shit, now we've got to fill out this last few episodes. What do we do? Either with just these characters or with the show as a whole. Her shows have a tendency to occasionally even stick around just in general. Whole seasons past when they've told the best parts of their stories. I'll go ahead and say it. Weeds probably should have ended when, spoiler everybody who hasn't gone and watched it on Netflix yet, when the suburb of Agrestic, California is reduced to smoldering ash. maybe it could have. And let's see here. Okay, actually, I stand corrected because that happened in season 3. It was in seasons 4 and 5 when they moved to Ren Mar in San Diego. Okay, so you could have maybe gotten 1 or 2 more seasons past the third, when the Botwins were on the run and trying to rebuild their lives. But after that, it just loses so much punch and so much steam so quickly. Orange is the New Black is fast getting there. It's starting to come to that Saved by the Bell problem, wherein you watch Saved by the Bell long enough and you eventually started going, don't these kids have to graduate at some point? You
was it like her sentence is like a year, right? This is the longest year ever.
Right, exactly. Are you late 20-somethings ever gonna go ahead and finish high school? 90210 was the same deal. Fuck, 24 ran twice as long as it should have. Basically, the show kind of starts to outgrow its gimmick. And there's but along the way, occasionally you'll also have these miniature arcs that, as opposed to just kind of, burning out too quickly, they'll have a good thing going and then they'll just abandon it entirely. Right when you have so many questions that you want answered and so much more you want to see of certain characters, nope, just dumped on its face in a puddle in a ditch somewhere. But all the while, it'll sometimes keep coming back to characters that you're intended to be engaged with, and you're really rooting for, but you end up just kind of realizing how truly awful they are. On Weeds, it was Nancy. On Orange is the New Black, again, it was Piper. This season, we kind of got a reverse, and this was a solid, satisfying redemption arc for Ruth. But meanwhile, we find out, Debbie, there just is not much about you to like. Everything you touch seems to turn to shit. This whole bunch of people would probably be better off without you. They do not seem to realize that. Why have they not figured this out yet? In fairly short order, you went full Kurt Angle on your former best friend while you were kind of zonked out of your gourd mid-match. It's just, in a way, it's kind of like watching a Ryan Murphy show. Sometimes, or a Tim Burton movie. That's another great example. Sometimes you watch one of these shows and then you watch another and you feel like you've pretty much watched all of them. You could play bingo or a drinking game. And yet, funny enough, for those who have been following latter-day WWE, or TNA to a certain extent, when it comes to ADD-addled story arcs, if you're talking about professional wrestling, how much more appropriate could it be? I mean, in a way, there's a certain something poetic about, well, I was really invested in this, and I kind of wanted to see where it was going, but no, someone threw a shiny red ball past you, and you just went off to fucking Narnia chasing it. or, man, I really could not give a crispity, crunchity, butterfingery fuck about these people and what's going to happen to them. I really just don't want to see any more of this. I'm goddamn bored. Oh, you're going to devote a whole 30-minute gimmicky episode to it. Well, fuck. Okay, then. So in that sense, the past couple of years of watching Raw and SmackDown has prepared me for this.
Well said. You really just gave a very general description of this entire season. And I think why I'm so high on it, despite the, as you pointed out, many of its obvious flaws, is that some of these performances and I think I'm very much caught up on two angles in the season. And that was one of which is an example of, hey, we wanted to see more of this, and you just dropped it like a hot potato, which was the struggling with the dehumanization of black folks as portrayed by the welfare queen character, and the through the looking glass, you're a piece of shit, well, no, you're a piece of shit relationship between Ruth and Debbie. In a distant third is, and we'll come back to it, but let me just kind of throw it out there. I went into the season really hating Mark Maron's character to the point where, and I say I hated it, not I hated the character in and of itself, like, you're supposed to hate the heel. This is like X-Pac heat. Like, I just wanted him to go away. Because it was like, if you're going to write him this badly, and I don't mean, like, I'm kind of wrestling and losing with what I'm trying to say about him. Basically, my impression of the Mark Maron character was they've written him in such a way where there's nothing good about him, and he's just going to come on screen and be a bag of dicks to everybody with nothing redeemable about him, to the point where I'm starting to wonder why I'm bothering to watch him in this show in the first place. Like, hang on a sec. There are elements of, like, Orange is the New Black where I just kind of want to fast forward through it. Where, like, I hate this character and I hate the story that this character's in. I just want to fast forward and get to the next scene of people that I like. And it started off that way with the Mark Maron character. And around the time that Debbie breaks Ruth's ankle, and he has this come to Jesus moment with her, where he admits that he's what's the word that he uses? Not sensitive. Lacking in confidence. Old man, and that he felt like he got shown up by her and he just didn't know how to handle it. I was like, okay, I get it. And then he kind of turns and he's an actual human being from that point on. I was okay with it. But up to that point, it almost felt like he was just a gimmick. It was, oh, look, crotchety old man who hates women. Go.
Here's my thing about Mark Maron, though. And I don't know how familiar you are with him. In a way, he is a much more roughed up Jerry Seinfeld. And I mean that in the sense that he does not come off, in his other personas outside the show as being inherently misogynistic. Let's get that straight from Jump Street. That is the part where the acting comes in.
Right.
But the reason I make that comparison is because if you've ever listened to his stand-up, his interview podcast WTF with Mark Maron, if you ever watched his show Maron on IFC, in which he plays a fictionalized, only slightly exaggerated version of himself, you realize that he's not just a brutally autobiographical bare nerve of an entertainer, but that's just who he is as a human being. Reportedly, I remember years back, I remember listening to an interview with Chris Hardwick conducted by Ricky Lindholm from Garfunkel and Oates. And of course, one of the things that Chris has been most open about over the years and most candid were his struggles with alcoholism and how it nearly destroyed his life and his career. And he talked about how he and Maron had this kind of standoffish relationship. They knew each other, Mark didn't like Chris. Chris didn't know why Mark wasn't terribly fond of him. But then one day, I think it was after one of Marin's or Hardwick's sets, or I think it was at a party or something. Yeah, it was at a party. Marin came up to him with a pamphlet and pointed out that, as a recovering alcoholic himself, he said Chris might want to read this and kind of take stock, because it kind of helped him realize that he had a problem. So, being that familiar with him, I can see a lot of that in his character on Glow, and see a lot of where the really divisive kind of racial and gender lines of the 80s are woven into that. But the whole thing about it is, and again, it's the Jerry Seinfeld comparison. You watch Jerry stand up, you watch as many episodes of Seinfeld as your taste kind of allows you to. I happen to be a big fan. But then you go and you actually listen to Jerry speak, and you realize this man could never be an actual actor, because there's just not that much range there, except for, and again, maybe this is appropriate for a wrestling show, playing an exaggerated version of himself. His character on Glow has felt from the very first episode almost more like they just merged the worlds of his IFC show with this one, and I'm not seeing really anything more nuanced than grumpy old for cokehead man, just kind of hates everybody.
He's actually the only character I really felt that in the second season took a step back in terms of development, because I feel like in the first season, they were putting out there this really funny kind of Roger Corman type character who's trying to make a comeback, and when he has all of these demons and he's trying to keep a lot of balls in the air, and I thought that was interesting. In this one, it's like, from the moment that Ruth gets in the car.
And they only touched on that once this season.
Yeah,
I
know.
One fleeting moment in one episode.
Yeah, where he acts halfway decent. But I say, like Ruth gets in the car with him. Like, Ruth saved the show, in the finale of the first season, and it's like they don't necessarily acknowledge that. You might make the argument, well, in a subtle way they did, because he gives her this project to do. He's like, just go, get out of my hair, because they still got to build the set, and so they film this intro to the show, and it comes off really, really well. And of course, he gets shown up, and but even before that, he's just like doesn't acknowledge that she's a valuable talent. He's just like, you're just a pair of tits, and you're in the way, and I gotta think, and I'm an artist, and you're bothering me, kid. And it's like, that doesn't connect to anything that happened in the last episode of the first season, and I just thought it was a weird choice. And like I said, it takes almost the entire season for him to act like a human being again, and it's only after Ruth, which is fine for a dramatic narrative. It's fine, it's acceptable. It can also be annoying, and it was, at least for me, that it took Ruth getting her ankle broken to for him to be like, oh yeah, that's right, inside of all of this nonsense is an actual human being who cares about this person and recognizes her value. But we'll circle back to him, because the meat of the show, the two things that I really want to spend some time on before our hour 15 minutes is up, is the Ruth Debbie relationship. And and again, here's where Ruth, I think, is a better written character than Piper. I don't know the lead in Weeds. I never watched it. It's on the list right up there with it's on the list right up there with Sons of Anarchy, and eventually someday I'll get around to it. But Piper, we've talked about a bunch of times, and I'm sure we will again, about how she's such an unlikable person and an unlikable character. And I think there have been pockets where I've said, okay, here she turns a corner, here she, gets a sense of, humanity where it's worth rooting for her again. But there's so many more four-dimensional, vivid, vibrant, almost heroic characters that I'm more interested in, that it doesn't really matter as much. Ruth started out that way in season 1. Season 2, where her arc isn't trying so hard necessarily as an actress and then as a wrestler, where she's just Ruth and she's trying to pick up the pieces of her broken relationship with Debbie, and she's trying to move on with her life. And she has a great line in this where everyone's like, it's just a show. And she says, why does everyone keep saying that it's not just a show? I finally have people who, when they get hurt and have to go to the hospital, are there waiting for me. And I thought that line resonated with me a lot. And I think as a character, that's a moment that resonates with her for the audience, in that, again, it's not just about her sort of single-minded career trajectory that that flounders and forces her to be somewhat desperate, which was not a good look for her in season 1. Here, she's like, okay, I'm squared away here. I like this. I'm a glow wrestler, and now I can focus on some other things. She makes a bit of room for possibly a relationship with, I think the character's name is Russell. She's trying to make amends with Debbie. She's trying to work as a partner with Mark Maron. I liked all of that. By contrast, you have Debbie, who, is kind of the victim in season 1, and she's almost like a foil for Ruth. And in season 2, has a much more interesting arc in that she spirals downward. It was a lot more fun as a viewer for me to see this this angelic looking person, who plays this America type of stereotype, and to see this darkness in her and watch it kind of descend into almost madness. And then, of course, it culminates in the big screaming match in the hospital, there are 2 high points in the episode, high points in the season, and that's one of them. It's probably my favorite scene in the entire season. And it's 2 people who, and I don't see this a lot necessarily, I think, in television, where even though one of them you're clearly kind of rooting against because she's done so many bad things in the season, and the other one you're rooting for because she hasn't done much of anything bad in the season, but they both have points. They both have good points, and you can see it from. I mean, this is where the writing is more often than not better than any other time in the season. You can see both of their points of view, and you're left as a viewer going, okay, both of you are equally in the right and in the wrong here, and I don't have a clear favorite. Plus, it was well acted, and there was a great sense of emotion. So let's just kind of kick that around for a little bit. What did you think of this season's arc, the frenemy relationship between Debbie and Ruth?
Wow, I mean, I'm not sure what else to say about it, because you just summed it all up so well. Is they pull kind of a double turn, for lack of a better descriptor. In the previous season, the show kind of became Debbie's second chance to shine.
Right.
Everything in her personal life was floundering. She had been done wrong by her best friend. Her marriage was falling apart. She had no place to go, and this just kind of fell into her lap. She threw herself headlong into it. She just happened to have the right look in the right place at the right time with the right people. She was a quick study, and yay, she rose to the top and became the number 1 babyface. And all the while, you got the feeling they were trying to garner some sympathy for Ruth, but she was just trying so damn hard and succeeding only at alienating everybody around her because she was such a fish out of water in this environment. Even when she kind of showed glimmers of, maybe she actually has a better mind for this than we think, and maybe this really is the opportunity she deserves. And it was kind of a yo-yo, because at the very start of the season, they start off with that sequence of building her up as being this obviously hardworking, talented, passionate, intelligent woman who was just simply never getting a chance because she was probably born a decade or two too early for the acting world in which she was trying to succeed. And now we turn things around in this season, and Debbie just becomes so ruthless and so vindictive and so just absolutely frantic to grasp a hold of something as everything else is falling apart around her, that it ends up blowing back on this poor young woman who finally steps up and kind of embraces this new avenue and shows some genuine aptitude and is able to bring this ragtag band of misfits together. Guys, sorry, not sorry. It's a show about professional wrestling. I have to make these comparisons. It was like watching Bret Hart and Steve Austin, or the Honky Tonk Man and Jake Roberts. Except in this case, it was a little more. It was obviously a little more planned than that.
Can I interject
think they were
something
going to
here?
swap roles. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to interject one thing, because as you were talking, one thing that rung out, if we're going to make a wrestling comparison, Debbie's character in Season 2 is the Shawn Michaels Championship run in 1996. Where on TV, he's this heroic baby face. He might as well have been Mr. America. Behind the scenes, he's a vile, just piece of garbage of a guy.
Right.
And he's toxic to the locker room. Right.
For every the boyhood dream has come true at WrestleMania. There's Shawn weeping over the title. There's quietly another, tell him to get the fuck out of the ring. This is my moment. Or
get up, you fat piece of shit.
Or stomping Vader in the nose because he timed something wrong at SummerSlam. Something like that. But it was fascinating to watch, because I don't fault, and again I'm going to have to look her name up here.
Just tell me who you think. I got the Wikipedia up. Tell me who you think about.
I refuse to fault Betty Gilpin for this, but you just don't want to dislike Allison Brie. You can't do it. She is the fucking Bailey of this show.
Yeah, it's a apt comparison.
Even when she's playing this initially awkward, kind of irritating character, you're still looking at her and you're seeing Princess Unikitty or Annie from Community. You cannot help it. They're just it's hard. It's so hard to separate the two. But again, I don't fault Allison Brie for that, because she did a fantastic job in that role in the first season. But before I start rambling too much more, that was the really stunning dynamic. And you watch all season as they kind of try to work together, and occasionally they kind of try mend their friendship a little bit. Until finally there's that literal and figurative breaking point when they've got the big blow off to their feud, and everything has to come across well in this match because they've been building it for so damn long. But Debbie is just in such a terrible personal place that the only way she can get through that match is to do a quick bump of blow in Sam's office while he's indisposed, and she ends up kind of having a little breakdown because she can't handle her high while she's got Ruth in a half crab. And in one of my favorite moments of the entire season, you just hear Ruth scream Debbie and then just crack and then credits. Absolutely perfect. Beautiful way to end that episode. And then you get basically the freak out moment in the hospital in which they're trying to deduce which of them has been the categorically worst person.
We talked about it before the show started in kind of our pre-show stretch, and whether or not you and you've said it here as well. Is it that she couldn't handle her high? And I said, as somebody who works with people, who are involved with drugs, more often than not, the drugs are amplifying something that was already there, that was kept in check by one's basic humanity. And then when you put the drugs in there, all of this other stuff comes out. It's the old Cosby thing that he talked about in his stand-up. It's like, why? What is it that makes cocaine so wonderful? Well, it intensifies your personality. Yes, but what if you're an asshole?
Well, I say handle your high because my frames of reference for why I say that, and let's just boil it down to just one frame of reference to keep things less complicated. I'm a lifelong Kevin Smith fan. Mm-hmm. In particular, if you've never listened to his tremendous slate of podcasts that have become so hugely popular over the last couple of years, the starting point I would recommend: Jane, Silent Bob Get Old. Because it is a 2-man traveling show that Kevin himself has referred to as an intervention podcast. Because it's a thing that he came up with for the express purpose of helping to keep Jason Mewes sober after Jay's demons very nearly killed him. And one of the things that Kevin points out in every show is, it's one thing to go out and indulge and get a little bit buzzed, as the other one says, hell, I'm high as fuck right now. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you still have to go out and be a productive human being. And he goes on to point out that's what this guy's problem was. He could not handle his high. Okay, and I will go ahead and throw this out there because it is very valid. Because of course the wrestling references are going to be flying. One of the things that everybody pointed out about Jake Roberts for so much of the prime of his career was that oftentimes you could never tell if Jake was fucked up or not because he was just that smooth in the ring. For a while there, he could kind of manage his high and compose himself such that he could go out there on some pills or a few shots of booze or what have you, and nobody who was watching would have ever been the wiser. He could just cover it that well. And as we see here, Debbie goes out and tries to wrestle high for the very first time,
and she loses control.
Yeah, and she just completely loses herself, and like I said, she goes full method Kurt Angle on Ruth and breaks her freaking ankle.
Well, here's what I said before we started the podcast, and I want to, and I want for the audience, I want to make this clear. I think what's going on with Debbie up to that point. I mean, I think by this point she had done the bit where she sold the furniture, and her husband, and I think was dating somebody else, and she had all of these elements of her life that were utterly out of control, and psychologically, typically, you find with people. That when things are out of control, they will desperately search for something they can control, sometimes to the detriment of everyone around them. And I think, and then the other side of that was you have this woman who is desperately in pain. She hurts, every ounce of her being emotionally hurts. And so when you take I have to control something and I'm in pain, and then you throw cocaine on top of it, you have a mixture, you have a very volatile mixture that produces a moment where she has control over Ruth. She can hurt Ruth, and in her mind and in her being and in her soul, she's like, I have to hurt this woman. Something's got to hurt worse than I do right now. And if she were of sound mind and body and not fucked up on cocaine, maybe she doesn't jump to that, albeit insane conclusion. But whoever said people were sane on drugs. So, so you have that moment, and even in the next episode, she knows she's done a bad thing, but God damn it, there's a part of her that felt good. So finally, there's a part of there's something in my life. There's a decision. There's a moment that just felt good. And I'll tell you, as somebody who who's big into mosh pits, there is a sense of good vibrations when you can just let yourself go and not care about the consequences. Where you can just be a physical primal being. And in that moment she was. Now, when you take a step back from those things, that's looking at her and her personality and everything really up close. You take a step back and she's a piece of garbage person. She's just
I know how you feel, because over the years when my depression was worsening and I hadn't kind of just outright said, okay, I think this is what my problem is and I should probably get help for it. That was where my love of weightlifting began. Was because no matter how shitty my relationships were, no matter how much I hated my job, and no matter how much it was killing my enthusiasm to write and be creative, at the end of the day, I could go home, throw some shorts and a t-shirt on, put my favorite workout mix on my iPod, and go to 24-hour fitness for the next hour and a half, and by the time I got done getting all nice and sore and sweaty, God damn, I temporarily felt a little bit better. No matter how much I kind of also realized that eventually I was going to have to go home and feel like shit again.
I think we've pretty well covered the Ruth Debbie thing. So I mean, if there's anything left unsaid, throw it out there. But I want to move on to probably the only other subplot of this entire season that really got my attention and is worth talking about. Now, I know for some of you out there, it's like, okay, this is where he's going to bring up #MeToo and Ruth being like, almost sexually assaulted, and the whole overarching conversation of sort of women and male dominated. Nope, that's not it, folks. Yes, that needs some conversation
because that was handled terribly.
We'll talk about it, but but look, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't the most interesting thing to me, and it's the only thing that was really to come out of that I could really sink my teeth into. And you want to say like, oh, it's because you're a guy. Well, I'm not going to apologize for being a guy. I'm a guy. I have tastes. But the only part of that I really bought into and was like, you know what? That's interesting. That's a fun thing to kind of look at and play around with and go and examine was what Debbie, and this is actually a great way to sort of end the bit on Debbie and Ruth. So you have Ruth who walks into a room and says, hey, I was nearly sexually assaulted. And because I wasn't going to allow myself to be the object of sexualization, we lost our time slot. And Debbie essentially says, "Why didn't you just fuck the guy and save us all?" and Ruth is like, "But like, how did we get here?" And I normally, the "how did we get here" is just one of those phrases that I like to use, in conversation. But it really is a "how did we get here?" How did we get to the notion where one woman says to another, "Lay down and spread your legs. Do it for, sort of bend over and think of England. Do it for all of us." And,
Mad Men did it better.
and that's fine. And just the whole idea of, it's in some women's minds, it's okay for other women to lay down and let themselves be dehumanized for the betterment of everyone else. It's the good of the many outweighs the good of the one.
Yes, and that's why, again, I was only half joking when I made the Mad Men quip, is because way back in, I forget which season it was. I want to say 5, but I'm probably wrong. There was what at the time was kind of a controversial moment in the episode, in which Joan makes off to go and seduce, I believe it was a Mercedes-Benz executive, in order to save their ad account, and it was, to say, strongly implied that it was not the first time she had done this, and it was handled with so much more seemingly legitimate and kind of nuanced and layered emotion than the way they just kind of had this arc and then cast it aside. And then ultimately what it turned out, depending on whether you actually believe this explanation or not, because it's never really fully clarified, the belief going around is that what the one executive, Tom, tells them is, we're giving your time slot to a male-oriented wrestling show because the wrestling is just better. It's harder hitting. It's more exciting. The moves are better, and blah 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 blah. And they go about this, and then Ruth makes her big reveal to first Debbie, who, as Mark said, completely non-slut shames her, prude shames her, about not playing hide the sausage.
Be a better whore.
Yeah, exactly. You fail at whore, woman. And then goes and lays the same truth bare to Sam, who is absolutely indignant that he would treat her that way, and in fact goes to the length of, as opposed to Debbie proceeding to pretty much shun her, Sam goes, finds the man's car, beats the windshield in with a tire iron, comes across, mealy-mouthed little sumbitch Glenn, who sees him do it. They lock eyes, and Glenn just pretty much says,
"I see nothing."
What are you going to do? No telling who did it. Lots of people want to kick this guy's ass. I don't know for a fact it was you.
I wasn't here. I was dead at the time.
Yeah. Check with Poland. Punch was served. And then after that, it's just kind of out the window. That's pretty much the extent of the consequences, and we never even have it properly clarified once and for all whether, okay, did he just take it in stride that she left the bungalow as opposed to handing herself over to him, Or was this actually a decision in which he went, nah, the men have it on this one. Better product, better advertisers, Papa John's. It's treated so trivially.
Yeah.
For something that could have added so much more to the season, to the characters, to the arc. But, much like Tomei having to confront being a black caricature on local cable. No, why would we ever dive deeper into something that could potentially be so fascinating and enrich these characters so much more?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. That is the arc that I want to talk about. That was the most interesting thing to me about this. One of the more interesting things about this season. But just to close out on the prude shaming of Ruth, I think and maybe this is stereotyping of me, or me stereotyping others. Like you would think a show in the hashtag Me Too era, you would think that a show that is mostly produced by women who have a opinion on the matter, this is really meaningful to them. It cuts to their soul. You think they would have done a better job. It's not like any of them are new to Hollywood. It's these are all professionals. They've had other shows. They're talented people. It's kind of weird that like a show produced mostly by women bungles an issue that deals with women.
And let's throw this out there, Genji. We know you know better. Your other Netflix original handled just exactly this kind of thing so very well. Just a few seasons ago. It's kind of like watching a latter-day Joss Whedon series and watching the way he sometimes writes his female leads and just going, Joss, you don't get to plead ignorance on this one. You gave us Buffy. We know you know better. Age of Ultron, I'm looking at you. I'm a monster because I can't have crotch dumplings. Moving on before that goes down a whole other road. That's a good way to say it. It's so much worse when you watch it and you just know the person who made something fucking knows better.
Yeah, it's bizarre to me, but so with all that said, we've now teased it a couple of times. Let's get right to it before we blew it. Let's talk about black folks, my favorite subject. So Kia, who's Awesome Kong or Karma in the world of TNA and WWE respectively, plays Welfare Queen, and so you have this mom who she's the ultimate like conservative icon, right? She's a puller herself up by her own bootstraps, single mom who raised her son and sent him to Stanford. She's the American dream. Yep. And she and by contrast, she's asked to play the exact polar opposite of everything she has been and stood for her entire life. She's a hardworking single mom of color, and she's asked to play a stereotype of just one of the worst aspects of perceived black culture. Fried chicken eating, spending your collecting welfare and spending it poorly. The old 80s Reagan thing of I'm on welfare and I have a Cadillac and a fur. All right. Mm-hmm. I've seen I've seen public assistance. Do you know? I don't know.
Although I will say I did once in a rural Missouri town in my previous time when I lived here. I did once go to a grocery store and find shrink-wrapped lobster tail that was conspicuously noted with a sticker on it, EBT. So hence welfare lobster kind of briefly became a joke between my buddy Jeremy and I.
I'm not going to begrudge poor folk their lobster, but they're not driving Cadillacs. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But here she is, and here's the thing, and I want to start off with this. She's given a line that she delivers really well, and I say kudos to somebody who started off as just a pro wrestler and has really come into her own as an actress. That you could forget that she was once Awesome Kong. She's given a line that goes something like, "Yeah, I'm a stereotype. We're all stereotypes." She's standing next to an Indian who's playing a Beirut bomber, a Asian woman who's playing like a ninja. It's just she's standing about a bunch of racial stereotymes. She's just one of them.
Let's point this out too. As opposed to Mark Maron, wherein I've said that he's sometimes capable of only being so compelling as an actor because he's so autobiographical. On the other side of the coin, you have Kia Stevens, who once reportedly tried to beat the fucking third grade math out of Bubba the Love Sponge backstage at a TNA taping, screaming, "That was for Haiti, that was for Haiti," after hearing some controversial remarks that he made on his radio show.
Right.
And she's playing a character who, just kind of quietly accepts that she's playing this very negative black stereotype, and is able to so quickly accept that to his fellow white students on the Stanford campus, her son basically is interchangeable with the other black kid in his class. Whereas, we're talking about strapping, fairly athletic-looking dude, her son, and little skinny dude that looks like he probably has to run around in the shower to get wet. And somehow his classmates keep getting the two of them mixed up, and she just kind of laughs this off with him. And so she's able to just kind of laugh this really genuinely uncomfortable racism off. But then, Mark, I mean, how did you kind of take what the entire sequence that happens next, which is easily some of the technically best paced, moments of the entire season?
I think there's one's idealism. Here's how I took it. I think you have one's idealism, and then you have one's pragmatism, and wherever the twain shall meet. And I think in Kia Stevens' character, she's weighing them against each other. And up to this point, pragmatism was winning out because idealism wasn't in any way challenged or even presented. No one was standing in front of her and challenging the idea of, why would you play one of the worst stereotypes for a black person? Why would you play something, that is an insult to everything you've done as a human being? Why would you dehumanize yourself? Because again, she's in a crowd of people all doing the same thing. Now, Debbie and Ruth, I don't think count. One, Ruth's not really a Russian. But when you have the ones playing into their race more so than anything else, I think the question becomes: is dehumanizing oneself worth the benefits that come along with it? Which goes back to the Ruth Debbie conversation of, why didn't you just fuck the guy? But like I said, up to this point, she hadn't been challenged. No one was saying any of that to her, and she was part of a number of people doing it, and I think that lessens the pain of it all. When she finally when she's finally confronted with it, but with just a look of disappointment from her son, that's when she has to think about it all. And so up to this point, she could kind of fool herself into, none of this really matters. It's all fun and games. We're all shitty people. We're all doing shitty characters. But then in that moment, all that time that she's been fooling herself, the veil comes off and it all comes rushing in. I think she was very much overwhelmed by that moment. And that's the strength of that scene, is that everyone going into it knew what they were getting into and had no problem with it and had accepted all of the things, good, bad, or indifferent. And then there's this one variable that no one's counting on: your son's disappointment. There's the utter confusion and frustration and disappointment that is zeroed right in on her. And all of that other stuff just falls away, and that's all she's left there dealing with. Because she's not, I was looking at the Wikipedia description of what happened in that scene, and she's like, oh, she's humiliated. Okay, but I never got the sense that they didn't talk about the get a job thing. I'm pretty sure that was discussed. And I think under any other circumstances, she's fine with it. It's part of the gag. But because her son is looking at her the way she does, and she does say, so I'm not totally crazy when I come up with this. She says in that moment, "I wasn't ready for you to see that." Mm-hmm. And I think that does go to the heart of the issue, is that we're willing to. I think we're all willing to make a certain degree of sacrifice, compromises, to move ahead in this world. Mm-hmm. But I think under a certain set of circumstances, even after we've made those, even when we're comfortable in our own skin about it, there's always that nagging feeling in the back of your mind that that you're a sellout, that you've taken your people back a step. And it's hard. There's no perfect answer here. And I like the fact that the episode kind of left it unresolved, where the son's like, well, you're still my mom, and I don't love that you're doing this, but here's a silver lining. It's pretty cool that you can do all those moves. The problem is they never went back to it. It was like they never even went back to her as a character. They didn't do it. It was like they have this great heel character. This is more of a wrestling commentary, but they have this great heel character who loses her title, and then they're immediately, because of how that ended, they're immediately into the Zoya feud part 2 with the stupid missing kid bit, and it's just, and at that point it's the only things left to deal with in the show are Ruth and Debbie, Mark Maron and Justine, his kid, and whether or not the show's going to continue. They just dropped all of that entirely, and I'm like, well, that was a missed opportunity.
Well, and let's acknowledge one more aspect of that, and that's the fact that when that happens, if you're really paying attention to what's going on with the crowd, there's kind of the subtle implication that the crowd really turns on this attitude.
Hang on. That only because they're into it. They're into it when she was willing to play along. When she's crestfallen and she's like, "Well, I'm ashamed of myself. My son's ashamed of me, and I don't want to be here anymore." That's when the crowd themselves kind of have this moment of well, we've done a bad thing. Let's get the ringleader, and then they turned on Debbie.
But the problem is, then that gets forgotten, because then, and then this is where, and I do like that sometimes the show tries to touch on some of the realities of wrestling as an art form. But this is one time where they really got it wrong, and that's the sense that the crowd just seemingly at the very next set of tapings or the very next week, they've all but forgotten about it. And they're right back to Liberty Belle being their conquering hero and Welfare Queen being among the most despicable of heels. It's almost like it was immediately retconned.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen with major shift moments like that in wrestling, whether you mean them to or not, is crowds tend to remember that and stick with it and kind of glom onto that. One of the reasons why wrestling fans are so frustrating is also one of the things that's best about them, and that is the fact that when they become thoroughly invested in a character, shifts like that, they tend to stick with them. It's easy to forget Dusty Rhodes was not always the American dream. He at one point was an outlaw character. He was a heel. But once he made that one turn in that one match and decided that he was going to do what was right, with the exception of a precious few fleeting standout moments in his career, that was it. So, had this been an actual wrestling event, the crowd would probably not have behaved that way. At the very next taping, they would have kind of remembered the way Liberty Belle debased this woman, and it would have kind of sold their hero.
Had it been taped in Philadelphia, they'd have been like, "Why are you leaving? Why are you so sad?" And like beat her up in the parking lot.
Fair point.
They'd have been hoisting Liberty Bell on their shoulders during the,
But okay. Generally speaking, I mean, and that's the kind. And we're talking about a world of wrestling that isn't that far removed from the territory days, where if your territory had TV, they really did tape in front of a live audience like that. They, kayfabe was very much alive and well. So it was not just shitty writing, but it struck me as something that wasn't really true to wrestling fandom. So no. I'm going to go ahead and pick a nit a little bit about that.
No, and I don't disagree with you, but since this wasn't this is a dramedy about women and relationships, and it just happens to take place in this semi-fictional ladies wrestling company, I'll allow it, because it's not really the point that wrestling fans would act away or not away. It's more of a point of, how does a black woman deal with the expectation that you should shuck and jive, and then make the concession. Fine, I'll shuck and jive. I'll do it. I think about Sammy Davis Jr. And I can't remember which movie I saw this in. But there's a bit where Dean Martin says to Sammy, this is all part of a performance. He's like, hey, I'll have a drink with you. I'll do this with you. I'll even pick cotton with you, but don't touch me. And like after the show, Sammy Davis's wife's like, they'll never think of you as an equal. And he was like, they don't have to. Whatever slings and arrows I'm suffering now makes it better for the next generation of black people. And that's fine. That's laudable. Like you get that. The blacks through the ages, and really anybody of any color that isn't part of the dominant race in any particular area, has had to make concessions along the way, so that the next generation behind them have it that much easier and that much better. So I wish that they had spent a little bit more time with it. It's kind of like they made that point, kind of, and then it was like, okay, we've check. It's like they started off with this season with a list of issues they wanted to deal with, and if they touched on those issues, they checked the box and moved on. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's the weakness of the season, is that if you kind of bubble diagrammed it out, at the center is Ruth and Debbie, and then these little bubbles here and there is like, well, we have a lesbian relationship with the Indian girl and Junk Chain 2, and then you have Junk Chain's 1 can't act, and and all this other stuff. And they're little bubbles, and then and something that shouldn't have been a little bubble was how do you deal with people's desire of you to be a stereotype? How do you deal with that in your own soul? That's a big thing. It's almost as big as the aforementioned, how as a woman do you navigate a world run by men where they just see you as a sexual object and not as an equal? And even that didn't get as nearly as much play as it should have. So, that's really all I have to say about that. Other than I thought the scene was, other than the crowd stuff, I thought the individual performances of Kia Stevens and what's her face, the woman who plays Debbie, Betty Gilpin was well done. And I understand for plot purposes why they did the next thing with Ruth sweeping in and saving the day and running off with the kid, but it was kind of an eye roll moment for me.
It really was. And on a more positive note, I did appreciate how clearly at least somebody on the show had been doing their homework about what kind of stuff happens backstage among professional wrestlers. What kind of drama do they go through? Because you've got some classics in there, including a gimmick infringement, stolen finisher. I have to think that it was a little bit of a winking moment when Carmen at one point says, you know why the male wrestlers don't do this? Because they never talk about their feelings. They just go out there and they just do it. Which somebody nearly owed me a new laptop because I nearly sprayed my keyboard at that. I'm sorry, are we talking about these same collective of big, beefy dudes with the mentality of teenage girls?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'm not sure we are.
Nobody who worked on this show knows anything about Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and the tension therein.
I'm thinking more along the lines of the change his fucking diaper conniption fit that Booker T once took because the goddamn Young Bucks shook hands with everybody in the locker room in the wrong order.
Yeah,
this was a thing that fucking happened and that he actually defended.
Look, I mean, if you're tuned into this podcast tonight because you're a fan of one, TV Party Tonight, and two, look, you watch Glow, but more of you're just a Netflix fan or a Genji Cohen fan, not necessarily a wrestling fan. Some of this you might get a little lost on, but know this: listen to any number of wrestling podcasts and hear the stories of the pettiness of the locker room.
Oh God, it's hilarious. Well, the stolen moves thing. And the way that Kurt Lumberjackson, played masterfully by Carlito, handles it. I mean, that's something that I've heard it addressed in tones ranging from, Diamond Dallas Page diplomatically calling up Triple H and saying, look, I saw Raw. You used the diamond cutter. I'm asking you as a friend. That's my meal ticket. Please don't do that. I need that move. And Triple H is saying, done. Say no more. You'll never have to worry about it again. And it happened. To the famous story that Brock Lesnar once asked Billy Kidman, hey, do you mind if the Brock Lesnar uses your shooting starry pressy at the WrestleMania? And Billy said, no, Bork, you cannot has my shooting star press. And, Brunk went out and did it anyway.
And done busted his head.
and Billy later griped about it on a podcast, saying, I remember the quote like it was yesterday. The quote was, look, I could go out there and I can F5 anybody. That move is important to me because I'm one of the few guys who can do it.
Right. Let's quick touch on the probably the third biggest arc of the story, and again one that was sort of handled in a way, but you have Justine and her dad, and it's like this one felt to me like they were punting a lot. Like there's no progression in their relationship until the very end of the season, and I'm not entirely sure how we got there, because she makes it a point at the end of last season to say like, hey, I'm your daughter, and I want, and they decide they're going to have a relationship, and you come into it with this season, and he doesn't really know how to handle her. Like, he's we start off this season with him pulling an American Dad, where he's like, "You have to leave. I don't want a roommate anymore." I forgot she was his daughter. Like I hadn't seen season 1 in a while, and forgive me, I was going through chemo at the time, so some of it's a little lost on me. But I was like, oh, that's right, she's his daughter, and that was the whole reason she came down and auditioned for Glow. Got it. Whoops. And I'm like, why is he throwing her out then? Like, I don't understand what's happening here. And then, it's like, you gotta go to school, and and then she goes, despite the fact that she's a rebel and you can't control anything she does. Like, okay, like, there was just some weird character stuff that didn't make a tremendous amount of sense to me. But again, they spent so much time dealing with other stuff that they really didn't give the relationship between him and her a lot of play until I felt like, and again, it was almost like in the writing, they were like, we did this. Is there anything we haven't done yet? Like, oh, that's right. We have this pre-established relationship between the dad and the daughter. We should do something with it. And they do for like an episode or two, and then it's done. I'm like, well, that was a big lot of nothing.
This established relationship between Sam and this character that we are given precious few reasons to give one itty-bitty shit about.
Yeah, here's what I'll say about that, and I'll kick it to you, and then we'll just move on with this. Sam coming around on Ruth and saying, "Hey, I'm just an old man, but I won't do the show without you, and I love you, and all this other stuff." Like, okay, I get how he would come around to that. Once all of the rough exterior is pulled away by happenstance. The "I want to be your dad" stuff. Again, nothing. Something happened. Now I want to be your dad. And then the the mom comes down, and they don't. And again, they don't. She just sort of yells a lot in the episode. And then at the end of it, he has like one good talk with Justine, and then she agrees to go back to wherever the hell they came from. Sacramento. And I don't know. The whole thing felt rushed. It felt rushed. It didn't feel very genuine as far as why would the characters make some of these decisions. And at the end of it, I was like, I don't care about this relationship. You've given me nothing to care about here. Think I'm being too harsh, or are you with me?
No. I think you nailed it pretty much. Exactly the problem. Pretty much spot the hell on.
All right. Last thing I want to talk about then. Boy, for somebody who's just like, it's just the best thing since The Wire, certainly are complaining a lot, but that's okay. The whole point is to.
Oh, Mark, you didn't really bust out. It's the best thing since The Wire, did you?
No, I did not. I am way over exaggerating. But look. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed the season. There were parts of it where, I feel like the first season was a kind of a love letter to wrestling, and this one was more about the people in the show, which is what it should have been all along. Yep. That's fine. However, what is life without criticism? And my biggest criticism of season 2 is encapsulated in one single episode, and that is the direct-to-air show episode of Glow. This is after they've broken the ankle. They kind of take a time out for love, and they just show you a finished episode of Glow where Zoya. They introduce Zoya's twin sister with the messed up leg and how she's going to come to America to help Liberty Belle find her daughter.
God,
I fucking fell asleep during this.
Terrible.
I honestly fell asleep during this episode. Now, granted, I binge watched it on a Friday night and was done about 2-3 o'clock in the morning. That may have played into why I fell asleep, but still, I kept waiting for something to happen. And here's the thing, and this is more of a criticism of Alison Brie's portrayal of this character. They give her alter ego Zoya way too much. And Alison Brie's a fine enough actress. I'm not really discrediting that end of it, but I can only watch her do the Russian character for so long before I want to start throwing shit at my television. Like it just, they gave the stuff with the twin sister went on for fucking ever and dragged everything down. the stuff with Britannica and the dummy, I thought was funny at first, and then like to kind of everyone, if you're playing the at home Radulich and Broadcasting Network drinking game where you take a drink every time you make a wrestling reference, you're probably dead by now, but from alcohol poisoning. But once again, here's a reference to wrestling. There are times on Raw where they write a sketch and it just goes on forever, and you're like, this should have ended at least 2 minutes ago. And that's how I felt about everything in that episode. The stuff with the Russians really should have been a lot quicker and a lot zippier. The stuff with Britannica and Junk Chain Papa Shango should have been a lot zippier and a lot faster. It's like, if the object was to show you how badly directed this is and how cheesy and over-the-top corny it is, mission accomplished. As an episode of television, I was bored out of my fucking mind.
It's something I've seen one or two other shows try to do. The most recent one that comes to mind is The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt did an episode like that, and you know what? That episode was one of the weakest episodes of that season.
I'm noticing a pattern.
Yeah, they're just generally not fun. I just don't enjoy them. It comes across as trying a little bit too hard. It's one of those things where it's like, save that for if you do a DVD release. Because if you're doing it in the course of your actual season, you're subjecting the audience to your little, high concept points for trying ideal at the expense of absolutely murdering all your momentum. And that was the episode where the entire season arc really started to run out of gas. And it became evident that they were really, really stalling to try to kind of pad out 10 episodes of their arc. God, guys, please don't do an episode like that again.
I want to read this to you real quick. This is from Vox.com. It's a review of the show. Just want to get your reaction to it, and then okay. Then you can hit me with anything left unsaid, and then we'll close out.
All right.
The show teams with interesting characters, any of whom could become its center, but Season 2 never succeeds in finding something as interesting as Ruth and Debbie's conflict to slide into center stage. That turns it into almost a collection of comedic sketches, occasionally interspersed with wrestling matches, not unlike the TV show within the show. Being left wanting more from a TV show is never a bad thing. But I could never escape the feeling that Glow Season 2 kept circling something without ever quite zeroing in on it. And looking at Season 2's strongest episodes might help us better understand why. Before we react to that, I'm going to add this on to there.
Okay.
A lot of people that I know had some really strongly negative feelings about Jessica Jones Season 1. Jessica Season 1 dealt with modern women-focused issues. It dealt with trauma. It dealt with a number of other things, and it was off-putting for a number of male viewers who I know personally, and I'm sure that extended outward to people who I don't know who felt the same way as these individuals. And I almost feel like the production crew in charge of Glow looked at some of the negative Jessica Jones backlash and just sort of the backlash to, the all-female centered Ghostbusters and just a lot of things where women become the focus and they're like, hey, look, they're real people with problems and these should be examined in a dramatic fashion. And go, you know what? Maybe if we don't focus as much on that, or keep it, don't dig too deep onto these things, don't touch a nerve, we won't get bashed on Twitter. And thus you have Season 2 of Glow, which is, we're just gonna tweak the nipple of these things and run away as fast as possible.
And that is where the half measures come in. That is where everything becomes reduced down to you're settling for half measures. You're doing just a little bit, but you're never quite really fully committing, really willing to go all in on it, and necessarily showing that you really care enough to kind of devote your show to it. And I mean that's kind of the last thing that needs to kind of remain kind of needs to be said that we haven't said so far, and that is just the fact that it's a very good show that could have been a great one had they just not been so wishy-washy on tackling some of its material. It could have gone so much farther if it just weren't for those two things. Just the kind of halfway touching on some important, thoughtful themes, and just the shit that always seems to befall Genji Cohen shows in general. And that's kind of my thoughts on it. And that's not to say I don't recommend watching it. I certainly do, but just know that it ain't perfect. It's going to have its flaws.
All right, Sean, I've hit the major points that I wanted to hit. I didn't remember and or care about Bash's relationship with Florian, and so when he died and they spent time on that, I was like, okay, sure. They did the Britannica's going to get deported, so she's going to marry a fan, then Bash thing in all of 2 minutes, so I didn't care about that. And since they didn't seem to care enough to delve into the lesbian relationship between the Indian girl and Hispanic junk chain, why should I? So with that being said, and I think that covers all the subplots.
Pretty much.
Anything left unsaid? Anything you want to touch on? Any burning desires?
I will say this, guys. Way to pretty much say Florian died of AIDS without ever actually saying Florian died of AIDS. Bra freaking vo. Oh my God, that was tap dancing that would have awed Gregory Hines. Well, officially speaking, he died of pneumonia. You're not going to find a funeral home willing to take the body. All the while, I'm just kind of howling, AIDS. He had AIDS.
Like, we get it. This isn't Philadelphia, but come on. It is also 2018.
But, yeah, lots of good stuff, albeit a lot of it woefully underdeveloped. But, just go into it willing to appreciate some of the moments of, oh, God love you, you tried.
Yep. If Jessica Jones was a little too much uterus for you, then try Glow. It's just enough. It's just enough uterus to get to make you think, hey, women's issues, they're a thing. And then, and there's some pretty fun wrestling in there too.
It's delightfully pussy. Sometimes the bad kind.
Do you like shows about vagina? Try Glow. It's vagina light. All right.
Have we got a show for you?
All right, so let's get into plugs here. Sean, real quick, what do you got going on where people can find you and watch you do a thing? Are you still twitching?
Well, yes, just not on a regular enough schedule lately that I feel like I should be promoting it. I'm kind of getting ready to move within the next couple of months, so my resources are all tied up in that. However, it's not stopping me entirely from doing all of the things, because in the very near future, i.e. this coming Monday, I'm going to be back on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network to talk about Season 6 of Orange is the New Black with you.
That's right, and the hits don't stop there. If you can't get enough of Sean and I, Then come back again on August 13th because we'll be doing our monthly On Trial, and it's the Summer of Sean. In fact, the Summer of Sean concludes with Dances with Wolves. Where else can you find Sean and I doing shows? Well, in the month of September, we will be doing an on trial for the Pamela Anderson superhero vehicle, straight from the comic books, Barb Wire. So
go ahead, folks. Ask why, because I'm not sure either.
And because hashtag schedules change, our second on trial for the month of September will be Predators. That's plural, Predators. And that'll be the same week that we're doing a bunch of other Predator-related shows because of the new The Predator movie coming out. Sean and I will then be doing an on trial for Halloween 2, the 1981 feature, the sequel no longer canon, with this year's new version of Halloween 2 called Halloween. Anyway, that on trial will be October 30th. We then go into November. We will be doing a nothing. We got nothing for sale. So no Sean and I for the month of November. But we're stacking them and racking them in December, folks. We've got Rocky IV, the on trial on December 6th. We've got an on trial for Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And finally, our holiday special on trial, Jingle All the Way.
Put the cookie down.
So that's all the me and Sean you're going to get for this year unless something else pops off. In the meantime, in between time, as Sean mentioned, we've got Orange is the New Black next week. We've got our Damn You Hollywood review of Christopher Robin. And the Metal Hammer of Doom will be reviewing Bleeding Through. Love Will Kill All. You'll also get a Screaming Boy featuring myself, Pat Mullen, Alexis Haina, and, of course, the host of Screaming Boy, Ronnie Adams. And we're tentatively calling this one The Day the Laughter Died. And what do we mean by that? It's all about James Gunn and 10-year-old tweets and a lack of backbone by the Disney Corporation. Poor James Gunn. That being said, if you're looking for stuff already recorded in the archives, we reviewed possibly one of the best metal albums of this year, Dee Snider's For the Love of Metal, on the Metal Hammer of Doom. Robert Winfrey and I just destroyed Mission Impossible Fallout on Damn You Hollywood. And if you're looking for a shit comic written by one of the members of Anthrax and drawn in crayon, check out our review of Lobo, Highway to Hell on Source Material. That's it for me, Sean. Always a pleasure. We'll do this again in a few days.
Thank you for having me up to the party. I'll see you soon.
All right. For Sean Comer, I'm your mandated reporter, Mark Radulich. This is TV Party Tonight. Be well, be safe, and behave.